Welcome to the weekly Torah perspective, a shia that is given by myself at the initiative of my friends Pinny and the Big K. This week is Parshas Vayeshev, the beginning of the story of Yosef. The last three sedres were the life of Yaakov Avinu and how he went into exile for 20 years in the house of Laban. And this week we speak about Yaakov having settled back in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, and the story of his sons. And just like in the last three sedres were about a conflict between two brothers, Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. So this week it is a conflict also between brothers, but not one brother against another, but one brother against 10 other brothers. And it led to an exile, which is Golus Mitzrayim, the exile in Egypt. And it is a good opportunity to have a look at the notion of exile and the connection with the upcoming Yom Tov, the upcoming festival of Hanukkah. In Jewish thought, we speak about four malchuyos, four kingdoms. And the four kingdoms are the overlords of our world in the time of our four exiles, and I'll enumerate them. The first exile after the exile in Egypt and the foundation of the Jewish nation with the Exodus, the first such exile was the Babylonian exile. So the first kingdom is called Bavel, Babylonia. The second exile was when the Babylonian overlordship was overthrown by the Persians and the Medians, and that we call Golus Poras Umodai, the exile in the Persian Median Empire. The third is called Malchus Yavon, the kingdom of Greece, of Yavan, which is the Hebrew word for Greece. And the exile is the exile under the Greek overlordship, not in the land of Greece, but under their overlordship. And the fourth and last exile is called Golus Edom, the exile of Edom, the descendants of Esau, Yaakov's brother. And that is the exile that we are still in. Now, the four exiles are alluded to, according to our sages, already right in the beginning of the story of creation, when it said, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es ha'oretz, v'oretz v'esosau v'ahu v'choshech al panei tehom. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth had become chaotic but full with potential, tohu u'bohu, chaotic but full of potential, v'choshech al panei tehom, and darkness was on the face of deepness, al panei tehom. Mind you, it doesn't say al panei hatehom, on the face of the deep, although it's often translated as such. It says al panei tehom, on the face of the deep, or the surface of the deep. Now, our sages explain or find an allusion to the four kingdoms in these four expressions: tohu, vavohu, v'choshech, al panei tehom. They say Tohu, that is Babylonia. Bohu is the Persian Median overlordship. Choshech, darkness, is the Greek exile and the Greek overlordship under Hellenism. And Tehom, the deep, is the overlordship of Rome, of what our sages call Edom, but they identify Edom with the Roman overlordship and the Roman culture. And they say about Yavan, about Greece, which is symbolized in this verse by the word choshech, darkness, that they obscured or caused darkness for the eyes of the Jews because of their edicts. A clear allusion to the anti-Jewish measures taken by the Hellenistic king Antiochus, who was the ruler of the Seleucid Empire, and the story of Hanukkah is the story of the Jewish revolt against this Antiochus. So let's concentrate on, instead of concentrating on the exile in Egypt, of which today's or this week's Torah portion is the beginning, let's concentrate on the other exile, the exile under the Greek overlordship, which is the subject of the Yontif, of the Jewish festival, which coincides with these weeks of the passage with the story of Yosef. It's interesting to note a pasuk, a verse in Amos, in the prophet Amos, the one of the 12 minor prophets. It says that in the 3rd chapter, the 3rd verse, it says the following words: Hayelchu shnayim yachdav, bilti im na'adu. Will two then walk together if they haven't agreed to meet? In other words, you could translate it as it takes two to tango. If two are going together, Yelchu shnayim yachdav, then this can only be because no adu, they made an arrangement. The word no adu is related to the Hebrew word moed, which means festival or an appointed time. It is also related to the Hebrew word aid, which is witness. We will see what these connections mean. Now, the 4 exiles are 4 instances where we were confronted with another culture, another outlook on the world. The Babylonian outlook, the Persian outlook, the Greek outlook, and the Roman outlook. Our sages say that the Romans do not actually bring anything new to the table. They were merely the vehicle for the Greek culture to spread over the world. It is Choshech al Pnei Tehom. The Choshech, the darkness of Yavan, of the Greek world, was al Pnei Tehom, was resting on or carried by the Roman conquest of the world. And this is true. The Romans have no culture of their own. Their ideas are all stolen from the Greeks. And it was even considered a little bit, let's say, lowbrow in Rome to speak Latin. The real the aristocracy was speaking Greek. The emperors would have Greek ministers to help them. They were freedmen, they were ex-slaves, highly learned, highly cultured Greek gentlemen who were taken into the service of the emperor. Now, by the confrontation with these 4, let's say, 4 views on the world, one needs to ask, why was it necessary for the Jewish people to go into these exiles? What's the plan here? And this is a very interesting subject. And we have a Ma'amar Chazal, a saying of our sages, about the Poro Adumo, the red heifer, which it's not quite a sacrifice, it is something like a sacrifice. It is actually there to purify people who come into contact with a dead body. They become ritually impure. It's called Tumas Mace. And they need to be purified. And the mechanism by which they are purified is weird. It's described in the Bible, in Parshas Chukas, in the weekly Torah portion, which is called Chukat. And what happens is that you take a red heifer and you slaughter it, and then you take it out of the temple, out of the Beis HaMikdash. You bring it to outside the camp in the Midbar, in the wilderness, during the 40 years in the wilderness. They also had a Poro Adumo, a red heifer. They took it outside the encampment of the Bnei Israel, Chutz LaMachane, outside the camp, and there you burn it, and then you intermingle the ashes of the red heifer with water, and that creates a thing called mechatas, purification water. But this purification water has a very strange characteristic. It is metahir temeim umetame tahorim. It purifies those who are impure, but it contaminates those who are already pure. So it has a positive, negative effect on people. And this Porah Aduma is described in the Torah with the words that it's a Porah Aduma temimo asher ein bo mum asher lo olo aleho al. It is a red heifer, perfect, in which no blemish is found and on which no yoke has ever rested. This, again, my friends, we need to understand. Our sages in the Zohar HaKodash, Parshas Pikudim, applies these four expressions to those four kingdoms. And I won't go into great detail. I will just want to mention that Asher Ein Ba Mum refers to the kingdom of Greece. And the Torah has already alluded to it as Choshech, Alpeneton, darkness. But the Zohar says something quite different. The Zohar says, the inun krevin leorche de mehemnusa. It's Aramaic and it means because they were close to the ways of faith, of emunah, of faith. There's quite a distance between choshech, darkness, and people who are very close to the ways of faith, of trust in the creator of the world, first recognition of the creator of the world, and then putting one's faith in the creator of the world. Now, two cultures meet. Of course, Hanukkah is the time when the two cultures of Israel and the Greek nation met, and met in a violent way, because the Syrian Greeks, the Hellenistic Syrians of the Seleucid kingdom, had interfered with the religious freedom of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Well, I say that, but it actually didn't start like that. It started with a civil war between the Torah faithful Jews and the so-called Misyavenim, the Hellenizers, the Hellenistic party. And one may ask, where does this Hellenistic party come from? Who brought this Greek influence into the land of Israel? We trace our ancestry back to Noah, and so does the rest of the world. We're all children of Noah, but Noah had three children, Shem, Ham, and Yefes. And let's not discuss Ham at this moment. There's a lot to be said about him, but it's not our subject. Let's talk about those two sons, Yefes and Shem. Yefes, who had a son called Yavam, which is Greece, and Shem, who is the ancestor of Avram, from whom we stem. Shem was a very great prophet of God, and Avram actually met him when he came back from the campaign against the four kings. He met Shem, and Yaakov Avinu learned in the academy, in the yeshiva of Shem. When Noah benches his children, when Noah gives a blessing to his children, he says, Yaft Elokim le Yafes, may Hashem give beauty to Yafes, Vishkan ba'ahale Shem, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. A father giving a blessing to a son when there are two sons juxtaposed to each other. Does it remind you of something? It is as if it foreshadows Yaakov and Esau. And Esau, Adam, let's not forget, is the ancestor of the nation of Edom, which is identified by our sages as Rome. And we said already that Rome is the vehicle through which the culture of Yavon, the son of Yepes, is being spread in the world. So where does this meeting between the two cultures take place? How did the party of the Misyavanim, the party of the Hellenizers, arise in our people? I'm going to tell you a story from the Gemara in Yuma, 69a. So it's Maseches Yuma, Samach Tes Omid Aleph, where the Gemara, the Talmud, relates the following story. The question there that's being addressed in the Talmud is, are the Kohanim, the priests of the Jewish nation, allowed to wear the Bigdei Kahuna, the priestly garments, outside the Beit HaMikdash, outside the temple? And the Gemara, the discussion in the Talmud, seems to indicate, no, they're not allowed to. But then the Talmud relates the following. Tanya, we learn in a Braisa, we learn from a Tanaitic, an early source. Be'esrim v'chamisha b'teves, on the 25th of Teves, Yom HaGrizim. That is the day, which is called the day of Mount Grizim. Wow. The 25th of Teves is exactly 1 month after Hanukkah. Apparently, there is a connection between the two. What happened that brought our sages to declare that this 25th day should be celebrated as Yom HaGrizim, the day of Mount Grizim, a mountain near Shechem, today is it called Nablus, where the Samaritans have their sanctuary in competition with the sanctuary in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And on this day of Har Grizim, we're not allowed to say hesped. We're not allowed to eulogize the dead. We don't hold by this restriction anymore. It is part of Megillas Tanis, that is the list of all the days that we're not allowed to fast and not allowed to say hesped, to make a eulogy for the dead. But these restrictions have been lifted a long time ago. What is this 25th day of Teves? It is Yom Shebikshu Kusim as Beis Elokeinu me Alexandros Muktum la Hachariva. It's the day on which the Kusim, that is the Samaritans, attempted to get permission from Alexander Mukdon, from Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, Mukdon, and that they asked his permission to destroy the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. This is the second Beit HaMikdash, this is the second temple. It is, the year is, I think, about 332 before the Common Era. And Alexander was just on his conquest of the entire known world. He was a young man. He only lived as a conqueror for 10 years, and he died very young all of a sudden. And who is this Alexander? Alexander was not just a genius general whose tactics and whose methods of waging war are still today studied in Sandhurst and in West Point, in the great military academies of the world. He developed many novel ideas in warfare. Not a job for a nice Jewish boy, but Alexander was not a nice Jewish boy. He was a Hellenistic Greek. He was more than just a Hellenistic Greek. He was a highly cultured one, an intellectual. He was a pupil of the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, who was in turn a disciple, a pupil of Plato, who was in turn a pupil of Socrates. We're talking about the top Greek philosophers of that time. And Alexander had more than a world conquest in mind. He had in mind to spread Hellenistic culture over the entire world. And he was very successful because he was not a tyrant who would impose his ideas on others. He would promote free discussion of ideas. And many people were very attracted by this Hellenistic vision of a world in harmony, with Greek as the lingua franca, as the common language, and a common set of underlying philosophical ideas, and each one could give implementation to these ideas in his own religious fashion, if he wanted so. This is the source of various so-called syncretistic religions, religions that were like choose and pick and mix, take some ideas from here, take some ideas from there, all governed by Greek rationalism, and Shalom al Yavon, may peace be upon the Greek nation. But this was the first time that Alexander came in contact with Jews. When he conquered the land of Israel, from the grip of the Persian Empire, we were not independent. We were a client state under the overlordship of the Persian Empire, a Persian Empire that had as its religion Zoroastrianism, which is a religion that is based on an eternal cosmic struggle between good and evil, a dualistic religion. And the Jewish idea of the oneness of God was completely foreign to the Persians, but the Persians, again, were not religious despots. They let us in peace. And when Alexander marched in, it was nothing to us. I mean, we had freedom under the Persians. We were going to have freedom under the Greeks as well. There was nothing wrong with it. But now Alexander came in, and the Samaritans met him with the delegation. And they asked permission to destroy the Jewish temple. And Alexander said, look, I'm not going to make myself into your affairs. And he gave the permission. As far as I'm concerned, go ahead. In that time, the high priest was a man by the name of Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the just, Shimon the righteous. He is mentioned in the beginning of Avot, in Pirkei Avos, in the first chapter, as one of the last of this great gathering, which is called Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the man of the great assembly. And he says, on three pillars the root rests: on the Torah, on the Avodah, which is the service, the divine service, prayer, and on Gemilos Chasodim, on the deeds of loving kindness, on a harmonious living together of people, where people give each other assistance and sustain each other. Those were the three principles according to which the world operates, according to Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol. He was the high priest. When he heard what had happened, he put on the Bigdei Kahuna, the priestly vestments, and he donned himself in all the splendor of the high priest, and he took a delegation of Jewish notables, Jewish noblemen with him, each dressed in fines, and they were all carrying a torch. And they marched through the night towards the Greek encampment, and there Alexander was with his with the delegation of Samaritans that he had received, and they were both walking towards each other through the night. When the morning came, Alexander noticed the Jewish delegation with the Kohen Gadol in front, with the high priest in front, and asked the Samaritans, who are these people? And they said, those are the people who have rebelled against you. When they came nearer, and he saw Shimon HaTzadik, the high priest, in his high priestly vestments, he got off his chariot, his royal chariot, his Merkava, and he bowed down, not just bowing down, but he prostrated himself in front of Shimon HaTzadik. And his generals and high officers who were with him said, you are a great king. What are you prostrating yourself in front of this Jew? And Alexander answered, whenever I go into battle and come out victorious, it is the image of this man that I have seen in front of me. The later Roman Emperor Constantine the Great stole this idea and said that he wanted Rome to convert to Christianity because he saw a sign in the heavens about, he didn't see an image of a man, but he saw 3 Greek letters, which referred to the Greek Messiah, to the Christian Messiah. But clearly the root of the story lies in the meeting between Alexander and Shimon HaTzadik. And then Alexander said to Shimon HaTzadik, "Why have you come to me?" And Shimon HaTzadik answered, "This house of our God, where we pray for the welfare of your majesty and for the continued prosperity of your kingdom, do you really want to be fooled by people to have it destroyed?" And Alexander said, "Who are these people?" And Shimon HaTzadik said, "That's right next to you. Those are those Samaritans that are in your company." And Alexander was convinced, probably because of this vision that he has had during his campaigns, his military campaigns of the face of Shimon HaTzadik, that he said, "Do with them as you please." And he gave a free hand to the Jews to actually foil the plans of the Samaritans for the destruction of the temple. And what they in fact did is they destroyed the Samaritan temple on Har Gerizim, and it was never rebuilt. Today, there are only a few hundred Samaritans left in the world, but they still bring a Korban Pesach on Har Gerizim, although they don't have a temple, but they have a high priest, there's no law. And it's a very interesting relic of history, but once upon a time, the Samaritans were a mighty nation and caused a lot of trouble for the Jews. You can read about it in the last, among the last prophets, Haggai and Malachi. I think mainly in Haggai, you can read about the troubles that the Samaritans made in the period of the Second Temple. Okay. Let's look a little bit closer at Shimon HaTzadik. Who is this Shimon HaTzadik? Not only was he the leader of this delegation, but his splendor as Kohen Gadol is the basis of the piyut, the liturgical poem that we recite on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, after that part of the divine service where we recount the service in the Beit HaMikdash, the Yom Kippur service in the Beit HaMikdash. After we recount all that, we have a liturgical poem, a piyut called Mare Kohen, the face of the Kohen. When you see the face of the Kohen splendidly and radiantly emerge from the Kodesh Kodashim, from the Holy Temple, it is like unbelievable. It is like jewels. It is like abundant joy, and it is of a breathtaking beauty. The entire Indian of the kahuna, of the priesthood, and especially of the Kohen Gadol, has a lot to do with beauty and splendor. The priestly vestments are called in Parshas Truma, they are called lechavod uletziferet. They shall be for honor and for glory. Tiferet, tav, pei, aleph, resh, tav, is a very interesting word. Tiferet, we translate it as splendor or glory. It is, in fact, the root of the word is pe'er. Pe'er itself means beauty. It is also related to the verb lefa'er or lehitpa'er. Lehitpa'er means to glorify in something. Lefa'er is to beautify something. Beauty. What an interesting idea. I didn't know that beauty has anything to do with Judaism. I mean, yes, some of our synagogues are beautiful, but we have in our Jewish tradition and also in our Jewish law in Halakha, we have a principle called Hidur Mitzvah, the beautification of a mitzvah. What does it mean, Hidur Mitzvah? Well, it is like having a nice talit, to have a nice, prayer shawl. That's called Hidur Mitzvah. Or to have beautiful tefillin, beautiful phylacteries that we use every day. That's also called Hidur Mitzvah. Or to have a beautiful esrog, the citrus fruit that we take on the festival of Sukkot, of Tabernacles. That's also called Hidur Mitzvah. But people who are not Mahader the mitzvah, they do not beautify the mitzvah, have done the mitzvah just as well. It is just some extra. It's the icing on the cake, Hidur Mitzvah, except on Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, it's an integral part of the mitzvah. Why do I say this? Because Me'ikra Din, according to the bare principles of law, it's enough to light one candle every night, and only one person in the house needs to do it. It is near Leishu Vetal. It is one light for one candle, one light for a man and his whole household. However, none of us does that. We all light one candle the first night, two candles the second night, and we increase it. That is not the bare bones of the mitzvah. It is a Hidur Mitzvah. Also, in many households, all the members of the household light a Hanukkah menorah. All the children do. And that has, thank God, becoming more and more and more the rule that all the children also light the Hanukkah menorah, the candelabrum for Hanukkah. So Hanukkah intrinsically has to do with beauty. Intrinsically has to do with beautifying our life. Here I come to a very interesting point, because the Greeks had an exquisite appreciation for beauty. They had an appreciation for beautiful literature. They had an appreciation for beautiful art, architecture, and especially the human form, not to forget the human form. And especially they had a tremendous appreciation for harmony. The enterprise of Alexander to conquer the world in order to spread Hellenistic culture had to do with living together in harmony. It was not to spread tyranny over the world, it was to spread brotherhood over the world. You may even make an association with Napoleon, who had similar ideas to bring the ideas of enlightenment over the entire world. And many rationalistic ideas, the metric system, the codification of law in the Code Napoleon, those were all very worthwhile objectives that found a lot of admiration also among Napoleon's enemies. And in a certain sense, we all are influenced by the Napoleonic era and the innovations that it brought to the world. The metric system has spread over the entire world. It's some time ago that it reached England, and it still hasn't reached the measures and the weights, and therefore we had Brexit, but I won't go into that. It's not our subject. Alexander's ideas were similar. There was no turning back from the influence of Hellenism on the world. And with that, the spread of the Greek idea of beauty. Also in recognizing beauty in nature and the harmony of the natural world. And from that endeavor came the origins of science. Not for nothing, mathematics goes back to the old Greeks, because they saw in mathematical equations a beauty that they pursued for beauty's sake, for the sake of beauty itself. The word tiferet that I mentioned earlier in Jewish thought, and especially in Jewish mystical thought, is the central sphera, the central emanation of divine light in the world. And it's both called tiferet, beauty, and emes, truth. To us, Jews, beauty is not beautiful if it isn't based on truth. If it is beauty for the sake of the pursuit of beauty, that is not true beauty. And this is what Noah told his two sons. Yaft Elohim leyefes. God will give beauty to Yefes, give him the chance to beautify the world. But he should dwell in the tents of Shem. And the tents of Shem are here the house of learning of the Jewish people, where the Torah is being perpetuated and carried from generation to generation. That is the Ohel Shem. Now, let's examine what beauty does to us. Beauty gives us pleasure, tremendous, enormous pleasure. It's not the only thing that brings pleasure to us. A nice drink brings pleasure. Nice food to eat, an ice cream, gives a tremendous sense of pleasure. Sleep, to have a nice nap when you're tired and you lie down for half an hour before you have to carry on an afternoon nap, can be tremendously invigorating and give you a sense of pleasure. Safety and coziness, when outside the wind rages or there is a snowstorm going out and you sit in your warm house, you get a sense of pleasure from that. And I shouldn't forget the pleasure that we find in sexual relations. They're a real pleasure, they're a pursuit that thankfully most of mankind does appreciate and pursue, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it's interesting that all these sources of pleasure have a direct benefit to us. We have been given this ability to derive pleasure from food and drink, because it's important that we should derive pleasure from food and drink, because it makes us eat and drink. I only have to point at mental conditions where people are afflicted by a loss of appetite or even eating disorders, who literally can starve themselves to death. Anorexia can be a fatal, lethal mental disorder. Sleep deprivation can kill, literally kill. Sexual abstinence leads to extinction of the human race. Not seeking the pleasure of safety and coziness makes us expose ourselves to danger and could lead to an early death. But why do we experience pleasure from listening to beautiful music? Why do we derive pleasure from walking in a beautiful landscape? Why do we derive pleasure from seeing snow-topped mountains? Why do we derive pleasure from seeing paintings, from seeing a beautiful building? What is this Greek form of pleasure doing for us? Potentially, it can do a lot. The dear Lord God has not given us these abilities to derive pleasure from these things if it's just a luxury. It's apparently necessary. The question is, for what purpose? Now listen to the way in which we describe beauty. Say in the human form, you see, we Jews have an extra bracha, we have an extra blessing that we ought to recite when we see an extraordinarily beautiful person. We say, Sheyesh ka'ele ba'olama, people who, how great are you, God, that you have created these beautiful people. So appreciation of this beauty is built in Judaism. But listen to how we describe beauty. We say, oh, that music was heavenly. Or, oh, I saw this picture, it was magical. Or I saw her face, she radiated. Or this and that novel that I read, it's out of this world. You see what all these expressions have in common with each other? They are pointing away from ourselves towards something else. something that is not part of our world. That is the true function of beauty. The true function of beauty is to point away from ourselves. All the other forms of pleasure point towards us. They are for our benefit. But here is something that's also for our benefit, but not to be benefiting us, our bodily appearance in this world, but our connection with something beyond this world. The Greeks had no such muscle in the body. They didn't have an appreciation for how beauty points away from themselves. On the contrary, for them, beauty was something to be enjoyed for its own sake, without any question, why have I been given this beauty? Why have I been given, endowed by God with this ability to appreciate beauty? And that is characteristic for the Greek culture, because they were extremely interested, extremely curious as to the workings of the world. They were the beginners of natural sciences, but they never asked themselves the question, why is this world here? They wanted to find out how it functions, but they never asked why it is here. Whereas our prophets, Isaiah, Yeshayahu says, lift your eyes up on high and see. See, like the Greeks looked up in the sky and saw and calculated the orbits of the planets to the best of their ability. And we're talking about the music of the spheres and the harmony of the heavenly phenomena. But they never asked, Mi Bora Ele, who has created these? And the words Mi Bora Ele, Mi is a mem and a yud. It means in Hebrew, who. Bora means created. Ele is Aleph Lamed Hey. And these 5 letters, Mem Yud Aleph Lamed Hey, can be recombined and spell the word Elohim, God. It is the ability to make a connection between the me and the Ele, the me above and the Ele that you see around you in the entire world. The tragedy is that Alexander died young. Alexander, who could have built together with Shimon HaTzadik the confluence of the Jewish world with the world of the Greek philosophy, of the Greek learning, of the Greek appreciation of beauty, could have been a fulfillment of this blessing that Noah gave to his children, that Yaft Elohim liyefes v'yishkoin ba'or le'Shem. But fate had it differently. We were not meriting to have this fulfillment yet. Instead, Alexander died young, very, very young. Shimon HaTzadik died. And after Shimon HaTzadik died, things changed for the Jewish nation. Listen to this. The Gemara, the Talmud, relates that during the 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik was Kohen Gadol, was the high priest, the light of the westernmost lamp in the menorah, in the candelabrum in the temple, never extinguished. The other 6 lights would burn out their supply of oil, but somehow, miraculously, the 7th light, the most western light, stayed burning the whole night. Does it remind you of something? It is mamish, the Nes of Hanukkah, being foreshadowed already in the life of Shimon HaTzadik. That was for 40 years. And then after Shimon HaTzadik died, sometimes the light in the westernmost lamp would keep on burning throughout the night, and sometimes it would extinguish. Then 40 years before the Churban, hundreds of years later, the miracle stopped altogether. And it was from there on that the destruction of the temple was almost inevitable. Then the western lamp would extinguish, would burn out just as the other 6 lamps. Now, I promised you that I would come back to this word pe'er, or tiferet, this beauty, which is the beauty of the vestments of the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says there are circumstances in which you bring this beauty to outside the temple. But it is like the ash of the red heifer, which has this paradoxical property that it works negatively on people who are positive and positively on people who are negative. When the tahor and the tameh meet, the tameh becomes more tahor, but the tahor becomes more tameh. You have to be very careful with these meetings of cultures. And you need a Shimon HaTzadik to guide you. You need an Alexander to be the great man on the other side, and then they can shake hands and meet. The big Dekoda comes outside the temple, and Alexander descends from his chariot. When Alexander is not on his chariot, and the Kohen Gadol is not isolated in the temple, they can meet. As I said, Hayelchu Shnayim Yachtov Bilti Im Noadu. Can two then meet? Can two meet without them having made an appointment to meet first? The appointment to meet between the Jewish culture and the Greek culture was the meeting between Shimon and Alexander. It went wrong. Shimon died. The madriga, the spiritual level of the Jewish nation, deteriorated until and on the other hand, the Greek empire split into 4 parts between squabbling generals who set themselves up as Oriental despots who didn't share the vision of Alexander. And the Seleucid kingdom was one of those 4. They produced in the end Antiochus, Antiochus, who called himself Epiphanes, God made manifest. His countrymen called him Epimanes, the mad one, because he was completely mad. He used to dance naked in the royal theater. He did something with pleasure that we in our society sadly also have. You know, it is very, very good to eat fruit, but if you can have fruit flavored candy, you get the same experience, but nothing of the nutritional value. We chase after beauty the whole time in beauty contests, in pageants, in shows, in entertainment, in amusement. It's all about beauty, but it misses all the beneficial effects of beauty. Beauty was not given to us for its own sake. Beauty was given to us to enable us to appreciate something that lies outside us. When the Hellenistic culture was on the way to develop into a real asset for humanity, the tragic death of Alexander led to a complete derailment of this Hellenistic project. And then you get the phenomenon that Hellenism becomes hedonism. And this had, of course, a tremendous attraction for the people in the Jewish nation who have also lost their she'ifah, their ambition for spirituality, and instead jumped on the bandwagon of Hellenism and became the Hellenistic faction in the Jewish people until they desecrated the Beit HaMikdash. So instead of the Kohen coming out of the Beit HaMikdash to sanctify the world invaded into the Beit HaMikdash and contaminated it. A process that led to the Hanukkah episode, the Maccabean revolt. But even the Maccabean revolt was a very, very small miracle, because although it set us up with an independent kingdom, the very kings of the Hasmonean house became themselves the greatest Hellenizers and fastened ties with the Roman power, actually invited the Romans into Eretz Israel, into the land of Israel, and ultimately brought about the destruction of the temple. But in the meantime, we still have a little light. Every year we have, in the middle of the darkness, we have the light of Hanukkah to remind ourselves with the Chidor mitzvah, with the beautification of this mitzvah, that we can enlighten the world better than any enlightenment and any Hellenism has done. But it also encourages us to seek this other meeting with the world of the civilization around us, the meeting in the way that Shimon Tzadik met Alexander, and not in the way that we had to fight against the surrounding world in the Hanukkah episode. Hanukkah should never have happened. The 25th of Teves should have been our holiday and not the 25th of Kislev. But it is what it is. So I wish you Shabbat Shalom. And a vredige Hanukkah.